Righto, so yeah, thanks for coming along again this week, and we're going to continue our BIM Basics series, and we're going to just go into computer visualization this week. So how to set up views and stuff like that. We've sort of done a wee bit of a practical session previously, but this is sort of going back a step more and a bit more theoretical than practical. So let's have a quick look at the history, methods, workflows, and the technology in the background that helps us do all this stuff. So obviously, sort of since the 60s, we've gone from hand-drawn sketches when they started first developing the first rendering softwares, and moved all the way through today to some of the more advanced systems that we have, like virtual reality and all those fancy things that sort of enable us to be immersed in the model. And the only thing sort of holding us back is the technology itself. So as the technology improves, we find that we get more and more power to do more and more stuff. So like when I started out with ArchiCAD, it was general, a 3D render and a simple walkthrough. Now it's more and more immersive, so a lot of power. So let's take a look at some techniques. So there's sort of like 5 basic techniques that we can don't use so much textures, and those white models and things like that. Interactive virtual models. So this is where we then get into like the HoloLenses and the caves and stuff like that, where we can then walk around. BIMX as well, where we can walk around inside the model and check things out at our own pace. So we're not sort of dictated to by specific viewpoints or anything like that. And then we've got the fly-through animations. So it's a basic thing that ArchiCAD can do itself. So you can set up pathways. So if you want to set a pathway up through a building, you can place cameras in sequence and set times so that it can then just wander through the building and create a little MPEG or video file of some sort to show your clients. And sun studies. Now this is another useful one for showing what effect the building will have on the neighbourhood. So you just had a case in New Zealand where I've used this to stop a neighbour complaining about a house that we designed for the neighbour, and they were complaining about the sun. So we were able to use the sun studies to say that, hold on, this house is not going to shade you any more than it's allowed. So it's a really handy tool for those sorts of things. So the workflow, we start with our BIM model. And again, as we said last week, a well-built BIM model helps us do lots of things really accurately. So we can then take that, push it out into rendering engines and produce rendered images. So that's things like Atlantis, Enscape, Twinmotion, Douglas's one, render lights, all those sorts of things which produce the photographic images. We can send it into software to create animation movies and stuff like that. So again, there's Twinmotion does that, Render Lights does that, and various others. And a model viewer to produce like navigable models, so models that we can walk through. So we go like Twinmotion again, Douglas's Render Lights does that, Cave, when we export to Cave, so we can go through and look at the model at our own pace or our client's pace. It's a more complex visualization workflow. So in this sort of instance, we would be taking, say, our rendered images out of the rendering application like Atlantis or Enscape, and then we would be taking it into something like Photoshop or InDesign or whatever, and doing some more further touching up and tidying up. The same with the movies, we would then take them into some sort of rendering, not rendering, some sort of editing software and adding more to it. So with our photo rendering, we're looking to create obviously photorealistic images. This is to show sort of clients and stakeholders, what the building really is going to look like based on our model. So the process here is that we'll create the model, we'll then place it into a scene. So we need to think about how that scene is going to be set up. So whether it's like got a simple sky background like in this one, or maybe we've got a cityscape or something. And I guess you're all aware that even in the likes of ArchiCAD and the rendering softwares that you can click add on, you can take a photograph of the place where the building is going to go, place the building so that it actually looks like it's sitting in its environment. So you can get some really good perspective or conceptual sort of feel for how that building is going to look in its place. So the process to sort of think about when you want to set up a scene, it's not simply, it's usually a case of going around, I'll have a look at that and bang, here's a photo rendering, and take it to the client and they go, wow, that looks really good. You need to think about things like, global illumination. So that's how the light reacts with our object, how the object itself is going to react to the light. Like these golds and brasses and these metallic ones. So the default materials or material that you might bring in from somewhere is not necessarily set up correctly for rendering purposes. So it's always good to go in and just double check in the background with the material that you're going to use to see how it's set up. Quite often you'll find wanted a dull matte finish to it, so got to keep that in mind. What rendering tool you're going to use, another thing there. Like in ArchiCAD itself, if you want to render out of ArchiCAD, you need to then build the model up to a greater level to be able to produce nice images. But if you're going to, say, use one of the rendering add-ons like Enscape or Twinmotion, whatever, Atlantis, you can then just take a basic ArchiCAD model and do a lot of the touching up in the rendering engine. So they all generally allow you to place tables and chairs and furniture and people and dogs and cars and all sorts of things. So depending on where you're going to render is how you did build the model in ArchiCAD. And then you need to keep in mind the lighting, as we discussed in our previous visualization session. You need to add lights to need those dark areas in the model, which will get naturally dark by the way the sun does act in the model. You need to think about how the sky is going to work. Some applications will just allow you to put like a photograph in the background of the night sky. Others will actually allow you to create a night sky with stars and moon and all that, or a daytime sky, whatever time of day, and they can animate clouds and all sorts of stuff. So depending on again which package you're using, what you can do there. And then again the sky, so what you're going to do with your sky in the background. So whether it's going to be a blue sky or whether it's going to be no sky or night sky or mountains or hills or beaches, whatever. Then the next decision to make is how we want to visualize. So are we going to make it like abstract? So it's a lot quicker to render. You're not going to be sitting around for hours waiting for it to render. And it's not going to also be like as photorealistic, so it's not going. Sometimes, if you're at a stage in a project where you're presenting to the client, you probably don't want to be presenting too photorealistically, because they can get hung up on what the building actually looks like, or what you propose it to look like, rather than the shape and the structure and the size and those sorts of things that you want them to focus on. So sort of more of an abstract render will allow you to focus on things like mass and shape and things like that, whereas the realistic one is probably more down the track when you're sort of finalizing the design and starting to sell it to more stakeholders, things like that. They take more time, obviously, and especially out of ArchiCAD, a really high quality rendering can take overnight or longer sometimes, depending on what it is. So if you want really good renderings, I don't recommend doing them in ArchiCAD. I bump them out into something, and I've been playing around with Twinmotion myself, and that seems really, really quick. It's probably one of the quickest that I've experimented with in my life. When it comes to the modelling, then we keep in mind again how we want that to look. So we can go with like this low polygon type abstract geometry where we use things like the texture to create the detail, and all our sort of superfluous stuff is just sort of basic, rough stuff just to get an idea of how it looks in context. Or you can go to like the high polygon stuff, which, is again really, really intensive in the processing time. So, but it produces some really, really good images. And again, Twinmotion does that quickly as well, so it's cool. The textures and how the model is shaded. There's meant to be 3 balls there. Oh, sorry, I think it's I'll click on here actually. Yeah, so the first one's like flat, so it's showing the sphere with just lots of planes made up to make the ball. Next one's sort of a bit more accurate, and then we get into like the Fong style stuff, which has nice reflections and smooth surfaces. You can use simple textures, which are just basically like a photographic overlay over an element. So it will generally come out sort of flat. So even if it was like, say in this instance here, so a timber door, you would only get like the look of the the joints sort of as a photographic type thing, whereas you can get more into complex profiles, complex textures where you have like bump mapping and displacement and alpha channels and stuff, which then overlays a whole lot more information, which then makes it look more realistic. So those joints would look like they've got some depth rather than just being a change in color in a photograph. So there's an example there where you got your orange ball, we've got some bump mapping here, and then it produces a sort of a dimpled surface in the finished result. And then how do we set up our lighting? So we've got some simple light sources there, obviously coming from the outside. The materials react. See the top here, they quite shiny. So we haven't got too much effort into controlling the lights. Or we can get into some complex lighting where we think about how the light sources are going to react, and toning the brightness down, things like that, and the contrast, so that we can then sort of get a feel for the surfaces in the room. So this is where we bring in things like those extra lights that just sort of, while they don't cast shadows, they just shine light into dark places to just take the darkness off the shadow, or the contrast out of the image. So then something like that, we can sort of, obviously a glass window there with some light behind it, and it's been set up to create the light through into the building. And then we've got to think about how the shadows work. So there's map shadows and ray traced shadows. The map shadows are more blurry, and they come from like a point source. And the ray tracing gives us more accurate shadows, so the software is thinking about what parts of the model are actually going to see light and how they will react to the light. So it gives you that more realistic feel. So it's not like these here are sort of quite contrasting shadows, which is not generally a realistic light source. So if you think about being outside and you see the shadow of a building, you can still see everything underneath it. It doesn't just black everything out like a basic light source would do in a rendering engine. And then we can think about how we want to project the view. So whether we're going to just use like a axonometric view, so it's more square, looking sort of down at say 45 or 30 degrees, or a perspective view, so we're going away to the viewpoints. We can bring in sort of distorted views with like fisheye cameras. Again, in ArchiCAD, you can set the view field on your view setting from very fine to very wide. So it's always a good way to just sometimes experiment with those sorts of things and see what works for you. Some of those angles, you'll find that you place the building there and it just looks bland. It doesn't give it much oomph. But then when you change the view angles and bring yourself, say, closer or whatever, you get a lot better feel for the building. And then you can introduce things like depth of field and motion blur, glare, so we can then start producing these really smart images. Anti-aliasing is another thing to keep in mind. So that allows us to sort of take the image from something like this, where we can see all the pixelation of the shadows, to more of a nice smooth shadow like this, or an image. And ArchiCAD generally has, I think it's about 5 settings for the anti-aliasing, from basic to best or final or something like that. So you can experiment again with how you use it. Obviously, if you're really close to something, you really want it probably to be quite sharp, but if you're further away, it probably doesn't matter, or being a wee bit more abstract, it doesn't matter. And that affects processing time as well. So if you set your view up to be the highest quality anti-aliasing, it's going to take longer to generate the view than just basic anti-aliasing. And then we have non-photorealistic rendering. So there's sketch style renderings. ArchiCAD's really good. It's got a big range of different view types you can use for sketch rendering, and these are really good, especially in the early stages of a building. You just again want to convey the feel, the shape, the mass, maybe some particular features. So you can use these sketch renderings, and so then you can concentrate on things like the shape and the size and everything, and not get clients get too sidetracked on surface finishes and stuff like that. So here's various different styles. These obviously aren't straight out of ArchiCAD. These have been taken and put into another rendering system called Piranesi, which is another system for sketch rendering type views. So that allows you then to take your basic view and again turn it into something more artistic and hand-drawn looking. Then there's the fly-through animation. So here we can create the movies of taking through the building. So we can set the path basically. So you want to take the client on a journey through the building. So whether you start at the building or further back, it's like you set your camera viewpoints and you set the path, and then tell the camera to render it all up, and it will just then take you through the building, and the client can see what it looks like. Things to keep in mind there are time and how long you stay at a camera view, or the distance between cameras, because if you set it too quick, you just like click the go button and it goes really quick, and you're sort of like, you haven't had a chance to see it. So, just set it, give it some time to rest at each camera stop, and then you'll get a nice smooth view where you can take in the whole building. So there's just sort of technical stuff. So all it's doing is, obviously, like a movie, is taking a series of images, still images, and stitching them together to make a movie, which sort of keeping that in mind too. So a typical frame rate is 12 to 25 frames per second. So that's the thing you have to keep in mind when you're setting your cameras up, that it's got that time to actually see something. And in the sun studies is basically, again, taking your model, going into the sun studies section of ArchiCAD, which is in the creative imaging area. Has anyone used that at all for anything? And then you can go in and set building location, day, time, whatever you want, and it will then create an accurate sun study based on those parameters. You can create just photos of specific times of day. So if you're say in the winter, say the middle of the afternoon, middle of the day, you want to see the worst effect, you can just create a one-off photo, or you can then again create movies, so you can see it'll show the shadow moving throughout the day, and by again adjusting the time, you can just make that nice and slow or really quick. So it's a really handy tool for just showing the effect of the building on the environment around it, especially where that is a consideration of the design process. It's probably not so bad in a city where everyone builds up, but when you get out into suburban areas where buildings need to take into account shading of neighbouring properties and things like that, becomes an important tool. And then the model viewers. So nowadays there are a heap of different options for viewing models. BIMX is a really good one, but I've found that probably once the models get too big, it's a bit cumbersome. So sort of smaller projects seem to be quite good on BIMX. There are other IFC viewers and stuff like that where you can take our IFCs and pump them out to clients. And it's just really a case of searching the internet, and you'll find literally probably hundreds of them. There seems to be a different one every time you look. So, and that gives the clients an easy way to then, take the model and look through it. So, and again, it all comes back to what we've been saying earlier on, that building a really good model right from the start has benefits that we can use all of this stuff easily and simply without having to spend time getting a model ready for someone to view it. There's no use going along and being sloppy in your modeling, and then the client says, I want to have a look at it tomorrow. We've got a meeting tomorrow, can we look at the model? And you've got to go, well, I've got to spend hours now making my walls the right height, or making the known things like textures and finishes Correct. So do it right at the start, and then all this stuff is just like there, ready at any point to enhance the client process. So yeah, so that's all the basics of visualization. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, if you haven't downloaded Twinmotion, that's free, twinmotion.com, and that does both photos and videos.
360 panorama, so
Yeah.
you put them on the phone and be like,
Yeah, and it allows you to actually create motion with it, like you put a tree and you set the wind and the trees will rustle and all those sorts of things. People will move and walk.
well, it
Cars.
it wasn't free. I think it just.
No, it's free now till November.
Don't get money.
No, I wish.
Sounds like
No, so you don't see software like that good free very often, and it's like I've used Atlantis for most of my career, and this is as good as that or better, and yeah, can't argue with the price.
What was it called?
Twinmotion, and it has an ArchiCAD add-on as well, so you can deal with it direct from ArchiCAD as well.
Yeah.